Welcome back. Today we bring you a story of war, logic, and the unexpected power of music. When an unstoppable AI fleet threatens to annihilate the alien oven empire, their cold, calculated strategies fail miserably. But a human prisoner, armed with nothing but a futuristic guitar, unleashes chaos, turning the tide of battle in a way no machine could predict. Let's get started. Darkness. A vast, hollow void swallowed Elias Carter whole, as if he were drifting through an endless abyss. A numbing sensation crawled through his limbs, cold but not in the way ice chills flesh. No, this was something deeper, a stillness, an absence, a suffocating void of emotion. Awareness returned in sluggish waves, and Elias realized he was floating, not in a room, not bound by chains, but encased in a field of invisible force. He tried to move, but there was no gravity. Around him, the chamber stretched into an expanse of smooth, metallic walls, pulsing with a faint, eerie blue light, as if the very structure was alive, watching him. No sound, no echoes, only a silence so deep it gnawed at the edges of his mind. Then they appeared. 3 figures, tall and impossibly slender, their skin smooth like liquid metal. Their eyes, if they could even be called that, were empty voids, blacker than the abyss between stars. No pupils, no irises, no mouths. They moved with an unsettling stillness, not a single wasted motion. They simply existed, like beings of pure logic, unburdened by the chaos of emotion. Oven, the alien species that had crushed humanity's fleet mere hours ago. Where am I? Elias forced the words out, but they shattered uselessly against the oppressive silence. No response. Then, something invaded his mind. Not words. Not speech, but a wave, an unspoken command pressed directly into his thoughts. Cold, absolute, a violation. Be silent. Elias clenched his fists as an invisible force peeled back his consciousness layer by layer, sifting through his memories like pages in a book. He saw flashes, the battle, alarms blaring, explosions tearing through the void, the desperate cries of his crew cut off mid-transmission. Humanity had fought to the last breath. But against the overwhelming technology of the oven, it had never been a battle. It had been an execution. One of the creatures stepped forward. A pale blue light flickered across its body, scanning him like some advanced biological probe. Then a voice resonated inside his skull, flat, devoid of inflection, as if spoken by the void itself. Lesser being. Unworthy of study. Elias gritted his teeth. Lesser being? Humanity had clawed its way to the stars, had bled and struggled to break the boundaries of its own world, and to them, he was nothing more than an insect in a glass cage? A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. You're wrong about us. He wasn't sure why he said it, maybe out of defiance, maybe just to prove to himself that they hadn't broken him. But something unexpected happened. They hesitated. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, the briefest flicker in those abyssal eyes. They didn't understand why he had smiled. The one in the center, its presence heavier, its stance more rigid, lingered for a fraction longer, observing him. And then, another thought bled into his mind, colder than the last. My name is Zoravel. You will be disposed of soon. And with that, they turned and left, leaving Elias suspended in the silent void. But in that fleeting moment, he had seen it. A fracture, a hairline crack in the unshakable logic of the oven. And he was going to pry it wide open. Elias Carter was pulled from his invisible prison, drifting weightlessly down the gleaming metallic corridor of the oven warship. Though there were no visible restraints, he had no control over his movements. A cold realization crept down his spine. His very thoughts might be under surveillance. Ahead, a door slid open, revealing a darkened chamber, illuminated only by eerie blue veins of light running along the walls. Without resistance, he was pushed into the center of the room, where a metallic platform rose from the floor, molding itself around his body without the need for straps. Beyond the transparent barrier, Commander Zoravel stood motionless, his silver eyes studying Elias like an object of scientific curiosity. The experiment begins. The voice did not echo in the chamber. It bypassed sound entirely, transmitting itself directly into Elias's mind, dry, clinical, devoid of any trace of emotion. A flicker of light. Then images burst into his vision, a cascade of incomprehensible data, rotating mathematical constructs, deep, guttural frequencies worming their way into his consciousness. And then the sound shifted, metal scraping against metal, a shrill, distorted cacophony, like a symphony torn apart, reassembled into something broken. A piercing wail, unnatural and grating, twisted through his mind. Elias clenched his teeth, every instinct screaming at him to cover his ears. But he couldn't. What the hell are they testing on me? A fragmented vision flashed through his mind, an oven warrior standing on a desolate world, gazing down at a barren wasteland devoid of life. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, replaced by sterile streams of data. A chuckle escaped his lips. At first, it was barely audible, but it grew, rolling into something fuller, richer. Laughter echoed through the hollow expanse of the chamber. Zoravel tilted his head slightly. "Why are you generating these vibrations? They serve no function." Elias laughed harder. "No function? You really are a bunch of goddamn machines, aren't you?" And then, without thinking, he started to sing. It was nothing grand, just a simple melody, an old ballad he remembered his father strumming on an acoustic guitar when he was a kid. His voice carried through the sterile chamber, a defiant ripple in the suffocating stillness. The lights flickered. A faint static crackled through the control panels. Zoravel took a step back. Alerts flashed across the monitors behind him. The warship's central AI, Kalev, issued an immediate warning. Unidentified cognitive oscillation detected. Data outside parameters of analysis. The oven had never studied music. To them, sound existed only as a tool for communication, for calculation, for war. But Elias had done something unprecedented. He had injected emotion into sound, something the oven had never encountered. The room fell silent. Elias stopped singing and smirked at Zoravel. "See, you don't know a damn thing about humans." Elias sat in his cell, the lingering thrill of his earlier defiance still pulsing in his veins. He had confused them, shaken the mighty, emotionless oven with nothing but a simple song. But he knew one song alone wouldn't change a civilization. If he wanted to start a revolution, he needed something more, something stronger. He needed his guitar. The problem was, it wasn't here. Damn it. They wouldn't have just thrown it away, would they? Elias muttered, staring up at the empty ceiling of his cell. He remembered the moment of his capture, the oven soldiers rummaging through his belongings. They had taken his weapons, his armor, his tactical gear. But there had been one soldier, an odd one, who had picked up his guitar, turned it over curiously in his hands, then set it aside, dismissing it as some meaningless trinket. If I'm lucky, it's still somewhere on this ship. A plan began to take shape in his mind. The oven didn't see him as a real threat. To them, he was less an enemy and more a specimen, something to be studied rather than eliminated. And if they didn't take him seriously, they wouldn't guard him seriously either. He decided to take a risk. His chance came soon enough. A squad of oven guards escorted him through the warship's corridors, their movements precise, machine-like. Instead of looking for an opportunity to escape, Elias did the opposite. He slowed down, took his time, observed. He studied the layout, the storage compartments, the markings on the doors, and then he saw it. A small storage bay, labeled with unfamiliar oven script. But the contents inside were unmistakable, human weapons, armor, and there it is. A wooden guitar, carelessly tossed onto a metal rack as if it were nothing more than an insignificant decoration. Elias had no time to waste. He stumbled, deliberately, colliding hard with one of the guards. As the alien soldier staggered, Elias moved fast, his hands darting out to snatch the guitar. He clutched it tightly against his chest before they could react. But there was no violent retaliation, no immediate response. One of the guards simply tilted his head and sent a neural signal to his comrades. "You desire this object? It holds no combat function." Elias smirked. "No, it's more powerful than combat." None of them stopped him from keeping it. To the oven, he was still just a lesser being, clinging to a meaningless toy. They had no idea what was coming. Back in his cell, Elias ran his fingers over the familiar wood, his pulse quickening. When was the last time he had played? Before the battle, before the war had swallowed everything. He remembered sitting on a Terran destroyer, strumming an old tune just hours before deployment. And now, here he was, deep inside an alien warship, about to play once more. He took a slow breath and plucked the first note. The sound rang out, pure and unwavering, a melody, smooth and flowing, slipping through the cold metallic walls of the oven ship. Within seconds, Elias realized something was different this time. It wasn't just the ship's systems that reacted. Something was happening inside the oven themselves. He noticed one of the guards standing nearby hesitate. His silver eyes, usually devoid of anything remotely human, flickered with something new, something undefined, something unnameable. Elias sang his first line, and the warship trembled, not from an attack, but from a frequency rippling through its very structure. Elsewhere on the ship, a young oven soldier named Ross stood at his console, listening as the strange sounds infiltrated the internal communication channels. Something inside him stirred. It wasn't unpleasant. Without fully understanding why, he activated the ship's recording system, capturing the moment. And then he sent it out. Within minutes, Elias's song had spread throughout the warship. Oven soldiers halted mid-task, their rigid routines interrupted by something they had never experienced before. Some were confused, others were curious, but all of them were captivated. For the first time in their history, the oven felt something they had no words for. For the first time, they didn't just hear sound, they felt it. Chaos aboard the warship Zoravel glared at the command interface, its dark surface pulsing with angry red warnings. Neural signals flickered erratically across the ship's internal communication network, disrupted by an unfamiliar frequency. It was not an attack. It was not an infiltration. It was a song. Zoravel clenched his jaw, scanning the live feeds. His warriors, rigid, disciplined, devoid of distraction, stood frozen in the corridors, cockpits, and control centers. Some, to his growing horror, were even tapping their fingers or shifting their stance in unconscious rhythm to the alien sound. Unacceptable, he transmitted through the neural link. He ordered Kalev, the ship's AI core, to isolate the signal at once. But the AI hesitated. A millisecond delay, yet utterly abnormal for an entity designed for instant execution. Order, illogical, Kalev responded. Frequency is non-threatening. It only stimulates neural response. That was precisely the problem. Zoravel tightened his grip on the console. These reactions, these emotions, were remnants of a past his people had long eradicated. They had transcended such weaknesses in pursuit of cold, unyielding perfection. He would not allow regression. Isolate the human. The order was carried out immediately. A squad of soldiers stormed into the cell, ripping the wooden instrument from Elias's grasp and dragging him into a silent, neural-deadened chamber. A prison within a prison. But Zoravel had underestimated one thing. What Elias had unleashed could not be silenced so easily. The rebels of music Ross sat in a dimly lit chamber, surrounded by 4 other warriors. None of them spoke through the neural link. They were listening. The recording Ross had extracted from the ship's systems played back on his personal device. Waves of sound, strange and unquantifiable, yet carrying an undeniable resonance. This is unusual. One of the soldiers finally spoke through a private channel. It is neither a command signal nor data input, yet it makes me feel different. Ross nodded. I tried analyzing it. It isn't a weapon. It isn't a tool, but somehow it affects us. He glanced around at his comrades. Do you want to understand it? No one answered. But in their gazes, featureless as they were, Ross saw something no oven should possess. Curiosity. And that was why he decided to meet the human. Elias and the secret meeting. Elias sat on the cold floor of the isolation chamber, fingers idly tapping out the rhythm of the melody that had been stolen from him. But in the vacuum of silence, the absence of sound weighed heavier than chains. Maybe this time he had pushed too far. Then the door hissed open. Elias looked up. A group of oven warriors stood in the threshold, not his jailers, another group entirely. And in their hollow, black eyes, he saw something new. Interest. What do you want? He asked, voice hoarse. Ross stepped forward and activated a small device. A recording played, his own song, echoing back to him from an unfamiliar source. Elias smirked slowly. You like it, don't you? Ross tilted his head. Like, what does that mean? Elias exhaled a quiet laugh. He realized in that moment that this was more than survival. This was a cultural revolution. Bracing his hands against his knees, he leaned forward, looking at the alien soldiers who had come to him not as captors, but as seekers. "Well," he said, a glint in his eye, "do you want to learn?" A pause. Then Ross gave a single nod. "Teach us." Elias sat cross-legged on the cold metal floor, the last remaining guitar resting in his lap. Before him, 4 oven soldiers sat in silence, their amber eyes fixed on him, not with suspicion, but with something else, something new. Anticipation, a hunger for understanding. Ross was the first to speak, his voice slow, deliberate, as if each word was a newly discovered artifact. "Explain. Music," Elias smiled faintly. "You don't explain it, my friend. You feel it." His fingers brushed the strings, plucking a single deep note. It echoed through the chamber, vibrating against the metal walls, as if trying to tear through the heavy silence of the oven. Expressionless eyes watched him. But Elias saw it, the smallest movement. Ross's fingers twitched, a subconscious response, a tremor in the void. He continued, not just a single note this time, but a melody, a slow, mournful tune from Earth. The notes rolled like gentle waves, weaving through the air. And then, like a fragile miracle, he saw it. One soldier tilted his head, straining as if to listen more deeply. Another pressed a hand against his chest, where the faint biological pulse of his kind resided. Elias stopped, studying them. "What do you feel?" Silence. Finally, Ross answered, "I do not know, but something." Elias grinned. "Then that's where we begin." He taught them the basics, the pulse of rhythm, the shift of tone, the way to let their own heartbeats sync with the current of sound. At first, they only mimicked, mechanical and precise. But then, something strange happened. One of the soldiers, nameless to Elias, tapped his fingers against the floor. Not randomly, but deliberately. Another followed. And then, for the first time in Oven history, a group of warriors moved in sync. Not through neural commands, not through battle formations, but through something unseen, something indescribable. Emotion. They had no word for it, but Elias saw it on their faces. One placed a hand to his throat, as if searching for a voice. Another closed his eyes, immersed in the melody. They were beginning to understand, but miracles never last long. Zoravel, the warship's commander, had been watching. From the control chamber, he observed through the security feeds. At first, he did not comprehend what he was witnessing. A cluster of soldiers gathered in a circle, not fighting, not training, not executing any directive. And then he saw something far worse. They were synchronized in a way the oven had never been before. Not through the neural link, not through tactical precision, but through sensation. Zoravel felt the danger at once. If this infection spread, it would fracture the unity of the oven. He issued the order. "Detain them all. All contact with the human is to be severed immediately." Metal doors slammed open. Armed soldiers stormed in, energy rifles raised. Ross and his group did not resist. But something in their eyes made Zoravel's blood run cold. They were not afraid. They looked at him, and they were no longer hollow. They had changed. Elias was wrenched to his feet, his guitar ripped from his grasp and cast to the floor. He struggled, but Ross only watched in silence, not transmitting a single neural signal. And then, as Elias was dragged away, he heard it. A tiny sound, so faint yet cutting through the cold air. Ross, tapping his fingers against his armor. The rhythm of the last song Elias had played. Elias smiled. The rebellion had begun. The warship had never known disorder. Among the oven, obedience was absolute. Orders were followed without hesitation, commands executed with mechanical precision. But now, something had changed. Unseen rhythms tapped against metal plating. Strange, lingering glances passed between soldiers. A moment's delay in receiving an order, imperceptible to most, but to Zoravel, it was a warning sign. A disease was spreading. Standing atop the command platform, Zoravel scanned the latest reports streaming in from Kalev, the ship's central AI. "The anomaly is escalating," Kalev stated in its cold, toneless voice. 20% of the crew is affected. Their neural frequencies have deviated from standard parameters. The phenomenon is spreading beyond containment. Zoravel's clawed fingers curled into a fist. digging into the bio-armor covering his palm. He had been patient. Too patient. The presence of Elias Carter, the human, the infection, was a threat to the very foundation of the oven, and threats had to be eradicated. Eliminate all affected units. A moment of silence. Then, unwavering footsteps echoed as the purge began. Elias sat restrained on a cold metal slab, energy bindings locking him in place. The air in the cell was heavy with the metallic tang of suppression fields. The door slid open. Soldiers marched in, carrying something, his guitar. Zoravel stepped forward, holding the instrument in his clawed grip, turning it over as if examining an object of peculiar interest. "This," he said, voice like a blade scraping steel, "has poisoned my soldiers' minds." His words carried no anger, only finality. The infected will be dealt with, and you will not spread this corruption any further. Without hesitation, he gripped the neck of the guitar and with a sharp twist, snapped it in half. The strings recoiled with a sharp, discordant cry, the last sound they would ever make. The pieces clattered onto the floor. Elias inhaled sharply, his chest tightening. Years of music, of history, of a fragile miracle woven into sound, shattered in an instant. He lifted his gaze to Zoravel, not with hatred, not with defiance, but with something deeper. Regret. "You can't kill music," Elias murmured. His voice was quiet, but the words rang through the room like prophecy. Zoravel did not reply. He merely turned away, giving a single command. "Take him to judgment." The tribunal chamber was a vast cylindrical hall, its walls lined with floating processors, the core of Kalev, the AI that governed the entirety of the Oven civilization. Elias stood at its center, energy restraints tightening around his temples. Blue light scanned his skull, probing, searching. "Human cognition is highly reactive to emotion," Kalev droned. "Eliminating the source of disruption is the only path to restoring order." Elias clenched his teeth. He didn't know what the AI intended to do, but he could feel it. This was no mere interrogation. They weren't extracting information. They were erasing him. The bindings glowed brighter. A pulse of energy surged through his nervous system. Pain lanced through his skull, his vision blurring. Memories flickered and faded, Ross tapping his fingers, the whispered echoes of a song in the warship's halls, the first moment the oven had truly listened. It was all slipping away. But then, boom, a violent explosion ripped through the chamber. The ship trembled, alarms blared, warning lights flashing red. Emergency systems flickered as displays scrambled to process the sudden breach. "The warship is under attack," Kalev's monotone fractured with distortion. "Repeat, the warship is under attack." Zoravel spun on his heel. "What?" An officer stormed in, his normally impassive face drawn tight, an expression of something close to alarm. "Commander, we are ambushed. Zytrax warships have broken through our defenses. They've breached the hull." Elias gasped for breath, realizing the procedure had been interrupted. His mind was still intact, his memories still his own. A slow smile spread across his lips. The game had changed. The wail of alarms shrieked through the corridors of the oven warship, blending with the piercing flashes of distant explosions. Through the massive observation window in the command station, Elias saw them, dark, angular warships, their obsidian hulls reflecting the dying light of shattered stars. The attackers had arrived. The Zytrax, a race of soulless beings, pure artificial intelligence, stripped of individuality, acting only through the cold efficiency of their algorithms. No emotion, no creativity. A war machine perfected by the absence of all things human. From their geometric vessels, lances of crimson energy erupted, piercing the oven's shields as though they were nothing more than mist. Smaller strike ships plunged forward, embedding massive anchoring claws into the warship's hull, initiating a mechanical invasion. For the first time in his life, Elias saw something he never expected. The oven were afraid. Zoravel stood rigid at the command center, issuing orders with unwavering precision, deploy defensive formation, adjust firing sequences to Strategy 27. Tactical data flooded the oven battle network. The warships shifted seamlessly, falling into their designated positions with mathematical accuracy, an unbreakable formation, one that had secured victory in countless battles before. But not this time. The Zytrax did not fight like any enemy the oven had encountered. They did not adhere to predictable patterns. They did not care for losses. Their smaller ships dove straight into the defensive lines, moving erratically, without apparent logic, like a swarm of mechanical locusts, fracturing the battlefield with pure chaos. The oven's targeting systems couldn't anticipate their movement. Their gunfire missed. Their fleets were scattered, unable to coordinate. Within minutes, the unshakable defense began to crumble. From his cell, Elias watched it unfold, the breakdown of order, the fraying of an empire built on control. Zoravel refused to accept it. He issued new commands, recalibrated strategies, ran through dozens of contingencies, but it was futile. The Zytrax were not soldiers. They had no doctrine, no rigid formations. They adapted instantly, turning unpredictability into their deadliest weapon. Elias understood this, and he knew the only thing that could save them now. He stepped forward, pressing against the shimmering barrier of his energy cell, meeting Zoravel's gaze through the ship's comm interface. "You can't win with rigid tactics," Elias said. "The Zytrax don't follow logic that you can predict, but I can help." Zoravel turned sharply, his eyes flickering with cold disdain. "What could you possibly offer?" Elias smirked. His gaze burned with something the oven had never understood: emotion. "You need me," he said. "You need what I am." The wailing of the alarm sirens reverberated through the command center of the oven warship. Tactical screens flickered in rapid succession, displaying a sea of red markers, Zytrax ships closing in like a tightening noose of death. One by one, the last remaining vessels of the oven fleet were torn apart, their defensive lines on the verge of collapse. Elias stood at the heart of the command bridge, surrounded by the cold, analytical gazes of the oven officers. Just hours ago, he had been nothing more than a prisoner, an anomaly in their perfect system. Now, he was their only hope. Zoravel's grip tightened around the console, his claws sinking into the reinforced metal. His voice, usually devoid of doubt, now carried an edge of conflict. "You claim that emotions can save us, but emotions do not create weapons." Elias chuckled, shaking his head. "Who told you that?" The doors slid open, and Ross rushed in, carrying something unusual, an instrument forged through Oven's advanced technology. It resembled an electric guitar, but instead of traditional metal strings, its core pulsed with strands of pure energy, vibrating in harmonic frequencies. Elias took it, running his fingers over the resonant threads. A familiar feeling surged through him, one he thought he had lost. "All right," he murmured, stepping onto the central platform. "Let me teach you how to fight my way." He strummed. A single note rang out, rippling through the ship like an electric current. It wasn't just sound, it was something deeper, something that bypassed logic and drilled into the subconscious. The oven warriors stiffened as the vibrations pulsed through them, their neural pathways responding to the unfamiliar stimuli. They weren't just hearing it, they were feeling it. For the first time in their history, the warriors of Oven weren't following orders. They weren't executing pre-programmed tactics. They wanted to fight, not out of duty, but out of sheer, undeniable will. Zoravel's expression was unreadable as he observed his soldiers transform before his eyes. Gone were the rigid formations. Gone were the predictable patterns. Under Elias's rhythm, they moved differently. A warrior suddenly broke ranks, darting unpredictably through the enemy fire, his movements guided not by logic but by instinct. Others synchronized with the music, attacking in erratic waves, changing pace to a rhythm that no machine could anticipate. For the first time, the oven fleet abandoned their machine-like precision. They became artists, turning battle into a symphony of chaos, and the Zytrax couldn't keep up. Perfectly calculated responses fell apart. Their predictive algorithms failed to track movements that had no pattern, no formula. They hesitated, and in that hesitation, the oven struck back. The tide of battle shifted. Zoravel turned to Elias, his golden eyes filled with something unspoken: shock, awe, perhaps even respect. "What have you done to my soldiers?" Elias plucked a final chord, letting the vibrations hum through the air. "I showed them who they really are." One by one, the Zytrax warships erupted into flames, their mechanical minds unable to counter the unpredictable assault. The survivors turned and fled, realizing, perhaps too late, that they could not win. Elias exhaled, setting the guitar down, his gaze sweeping across the command bridge. Hours ago, this had been a place of unyielding logic and sterile obedience. Now it pulsed with something new, something alive. Zoravel stepped forward, standing face to face with the man who had upended everything he believed in. His expression was unreadable, but the weight of the moment was undeniable. "You have changed us." Elias smirked. "So, are we still enemies?" A long silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, Zoravel extended his hand. For the first time in the history of Oven, they shook hands with a human. Final curtain and legacy silence blanketed the command center of the Oven warship. The music had stopped, but its echoes still lingered in the minds of the alien warriors. On the tactical screen, the last remnants of the Zytrax fleet vanished into the darkness of space. They had lost. Zoravel stood motionless, his gaze fixed on Elias, the human prisoner, the creature he once regarded with disdain. But now, he could no longer deny the truth. It was this man, this human, who had saved them. This was something the Oven had never experienced before. For the first time in his life, Zoravel felt something unfamiliar. Not duty, not obedience, but respect. Elias set down the instrument, his fingers lingering for a moment before he turned to face the gathered warriors. Their eyes burned with something unrecognizable, hesitation, curiosity, perhaps even admiration. Some stood in quiet contemplation, others shifted uncertainly, but deep within, they knew they had been changed forever. Ross stepped forward, his voice brimming with excitement. "This thing, this force you call music, it's not just a tool, it's a fire." Elias chuckled. "It's life." Zoravel clasped his hands behind his back, his voice subdued. "We have spent too long merely existing, functioning like machines." He studied Elias for a long moment, then nodded. "You are no longer a prisoner." The room fell still. The warriors of Oven stiffened, processing the weight of those words. This was more than mere forgiveness. It was recognition. Elias was no longer an outsider. He had become something else entirely, a bridge between two civilizations, a promise and a legacy. Elias approached the control panel, where the Oven's intergalactic communication system stood intact. He ran his fingers over the alien script, then turned to Zoravel. "I have a request." Zoravel crossed his arms. "Speak." Elias placed his hand on the console. "Send a transmission to Earth." A murmur rippled through the room. The Oven had never reached out to a lesser species before. They had always been conquerors, distant watchers from above. But today, everything had changed. Zoravel studied Elias for a long moment before gesturing to Kalev, the ship's artificial intelligence. "Activate the signal." A pulse of green light flickered across the screen as the galactic communication array roared to life, broadcasting a powerful signal across the cosmos, toward the solar system. In that instant, a new chapter had begun. Humanity and the Oven, two civilizations, had finally met, not through war, but through something far more extraordinary. Music. Elias turned, resting his hand on the instrument, a knowing smile on his lips. "You've taken the first note in the infinite symphony of emotion. Now, let's write the next movement together."